Hello Year 11, Miss Cole here. So I am going to very quickly take you through the poem Kamikaze. So as ever, start with the message. So worth remembering that this is not based on any kind of factual experience, but rather a fascination with the sort of psychological journey of a kamikaze pilot, what led them to take part in those missions. So in this poem, I think Beatrice Garland is exploring the power of propaganda and the way patriotism can be exploited in conflict situations to make people do dreadful things. As the poem develops, I think it then exposes the inner conflict endured by those involved in a conflict scenario, and ultimately how nature is the most powerful force of all. That is what wins out. As ever, going to start with the structure. So if you look at the poem, it is very clear that it is written in regular stanzas. And they reflect that tight military order and control that kamikaze pilots were expected to adhere to. However, that is contrasted with the use of free verse and enjambment all the way through. There's very, very little punctuation, and that demonstrates the pilot's desire to break free from those constraints. That's both the military constraints and those societal ones. Remember that it was considered a mark of great honour to be a kamikaze pilot and dishonour to refuse to go through with your mission. Okay. Halfway through, in fact it's not halfway through at all, that's a complete lie, it's at the end of the first stanza we have a volta, okay, that is indicated by the conjunction but, okay, wherever that conjunction but is used, we know we're going to be looking at an alternative or a contrasting idea, and that marks the pilot's moment of doubt following that very patriotic first stanza. And finally, I want to draw your attention to the final word, to die, links to the title Kamikaze, almost makes it seem like it was an inevitability. His life was going to end. It didn't end in the way that we would anticipate from the title, but his life as he knew it certainly did, and the way that the start and the end link in that way gives it a sense of inevitability. Okay, let's have a look at some of the language that's worth commenting on. So right from this first, so in the first stanza, he is introduced as having a shaven head full of powerful incantations, and there's two things you can take there. That shaven head, that shows that uniformity, that lack of individual value that was attributed to these men. They were just seen as mechanisms of war rather than as people as such. And then that links to that head full of powerful incantations. That would have been very intentional. So that word incantations evokes imagery of spells and control, suggesting that perhaps he has been brainwashed, and is modified by the adjective powerful to demonstrate the hold that they had over him. The first half of the poem is littered with patriotic language. That starts from the very outset in the first line with the mention of the sunrise and how he embarked at that moment. Sunrise is a symbol of Japanese culture, land of rising sun, and in this case is also quite ironic because the sunrise suggests a new start and rebirth of a new day, yet for him it is marking the exact opposite. It's marking a potential end. The next time that I think is quite interesting to remark on that patriotic language is when we look at the fishing boats. They are described using the simile arcing in swathes like a huge flag wave, first one way and then the other. So arcing, I think, takes us back to, again, that first stanza and the mention of that samurai sword. I think what is clear is that his patriotic duty remains on his mind throughout, which is why when he's looking at the boats, he's seeing them as being like flags. Flags are symbols of national pride, but equally a flag can be a symbol of surrender, and I think that shows that he is conflicted at this moment. That is further reinforced by the way that the flags are waving first one way and then the other. I think they reflect his thoughts, how one moment he is of the mindset that he will act in one way and then he changes his mind. He is at this moment incredibly conflicted. The boats are also said to wave in a figure of 8, And that number 8 is also significant. It creates that infinity sign, and you quite often will find it on a grave to show that at that moment somebody is entering eternal life. And that is what he would have believed he would have been entering upon the moment of completion of his mission, his eternal life. And by refusing to go ahead with his mission, he is actually sacrificing that potentially. Perhaps further reinforced as well by the fact that in traditional Japanese culture, 8 is a very holy number that is meant to connect you to God. So it would imply that on his mind is the fact that potentially his death is imminent. Another really interesting symbol, I think, is this first sort of really natural image of this green-blue translucency. Translucent obviously is something that is not quite clear. So it's like he's having an epiphany, but he hasn't quite reached total clarity at this point. But things are certainly becoming clearer. It's almost like those incantations are starting to lift. And following this, when he looks down, we've got a couple of descriptions of fish. And this first one, I think, shows that at this moment his mind is still very much fixated on the task he's meant to be doing. So flashing silver as their bellies swiveled towards the sun. You've got lots of sibilance there, reflecting the fact that the air is still rushing past the aeroplane. I think that's the sound of the wind surrounding him, but also potentially the sound of his plane as it would be sort of dive bombing towards its target. The way that they're flashing silver as they swivel towards the sun, I think actually evokes an image of kamikaze pilots flying into the horizon, sort of linking him in some way with nature at that moment. But is that in order to lead him to this epiphany that actually what he's about to do is completely unnatural? Okay. The final image of the fish that we get is of this dark prince, and I think that is to confirm that actually nothing is more powerful than nature. It's what's used to lead him to his epiphany, and as strong as you think he should be, the strongest image in the whole thing is of this fish. I just think it clarifies the strength of nature. Final thing I think to remark on with language is the narrative perspective. So it's all third person, her father, except from those final stanzas when it's first person, we children. But what it never ever is from the pilot's perspective. His voice is completely lost, showing that he lost that right when he went back on his decision to his kamikaze mission. He decided not to go through with it when he backed out. So it shows sort of how insignificant he became. He no longer had a voice. It's all assumed, and it's assumed as well by she thought. He must have those sort of modal verb there. She just makes assumptions. There's no certainty. And another thing that just sort of stood out as well at the end of the fourth stanza and the start of the fifth, I think this is his moment when he makes up his mind. His father's boat's safe. Yes, grandfather's boat's safe. I think that's his moment where he reflects on how relieved he was at his father's safe return from sea. And I think he assumes his children will feel the same way, which the reader then discovers is not the case. And I think that makes it all the more heartbreaking that he doesn't get that same homecoming. Okay, final thing then. What can we link it to? Absolutely loads. So you could be looking at remains, the lasting effect of conflict. You could go bayonet charge, prelude, Ozymandias, look at the power of nature, charge of the Light Brigade, bayonet charge, exposure for the power of propaganda, power poppies for the power of memory, especially with the link to a mother, because it's as a mother that she reflects on her father's journey. So yeah, loads and loads of connections you've made. So well done for getting to the end of the video, and I hope it's been helpful.